Today is another big day in the spring training schedule. First full squad workout for the Orioles in Sarasota today. So let's talk about storylines. What are the three biggest ones for you to watch surrounding the Baltimore Orioles in Sarasota this spring? We'll talk about that coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, February 18th, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to talk about the three biggest spring training storylines for the Orioles. That first full squad workout is today. I wanted to talk about the top of the rotation, since at least to this point, the Orioles have not brought in an ace-type pitcher to replace Corbin Burnes. I want to talk about Jackson Holliday. A lot of eyes are going to be on him. Is there a spot reserved for him, and can he earn it in this everyday Orioles lineup? And then I want to talk about the fluidity of the opening day roster right now. Is there really that many spots? And will there really be that many spring training roster battles at all? We're going to get to all that coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast. But first, just want to thank the everydayers out there, everyone who is tuned in. If you're enjoying the show, and we are kind of back to that in-season schedule now, do 3 days a week in the offseason. We're back to 5 days a week here as the Orioles have reported to spring training. First full squad workout is today. So if you like the show, tell a friend, tell your fellow Orioles fans about it. Please like, comment, and subscribe here to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. If you're just a podcast listener, which is mostly what I do when I consume my podcast, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or wherever you may listen, please subscribe to the show there. Leave a 5-star rating and a review if you can. That really, really helps out the pod. I'm going to ask for some 5-star ratings and reviews right now on Apple Podcasts. Been a while since we got some. Definitely helps out the show. So, want to talk Orioles? Go ahead and do it if you'd like in the Apple reviews section. That really helps out the show. And if you have any thoughts, feedback, criticism, mailbag questions, whatever it may be, you can email me and the podcast. That is lockedonorioles@gmail.com. So let's jump into it for today. The three biggest spring training storylines for the Orioles here in 2025. Pretty much everybody on this roster should be at Sarasota by this point. Again, today, February 18th, is the first full squad workout. Pitchers and catchers reported last week. Now all the hitters need to be there too, with the first spring training game coming up on Saturday against the Pirates. I believe that is a MASN broadcast as well. One of the 8 they're doing this spring, more than 7 last year, so they knocked it up by 1. But let's talk about the first big spring training storyline. And I think the first one is, who will start on opening day for the Orioles? Because obviously the O's went out and made the big trade to get Corbin Burnes last offseason. When they did that, he became the clear ace, one of the top 5 starting pitchers in baseball, and everybody knew he's going to be the ace all year. He's going to start on opening day. And remember, he was awesome in that opening day win against the Angels when he got the ball and just took off from there. This year, there's not that same kind of slam dunk ace on this roster who's going to get the ball. If you think back to 2023 when Kyle Gibson was the opening day starter, it does feel slightly more like that. And the question has been throughout this offseason, are the Orioles going to replace Corbin Burnes? And at this point, it still could happen. There are Dylan Cease and others still potentially out there on the trade market. I keep saying this, but even though the Corbin Burnes trade was made on February 1st last year, Dylan Cease was traded to the Padres from the White Sox on March 13th last spring. That's still almost a month away. So there is still time for a move like that to be made. But I think by now, you're about to start spring training games. You got a full squad workout. You're assuming the Orioles are pretty much going at least into the season with this roster, which would be at least without a true ace. So you're looking at a projected rotation of Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez, Charlie Morton, Dean Kramer, and Tomoyuki Sugano, with Albert Suarez and Cade Povich as kind of the main starting pitching depth behind them. Now, the Orioles certainly did a great job of adding depth this offseason, going to get Morton and Sugano, a couple of older guys coming from different parts. Morton, a longtime veteran of the big league. Sugano coming over from Japan at 35, will throw his first big league pitch. So it's exciting to have that depth. It's better depth at the back of the rotation than they had last year. And at some point, you hope you can get something from Tyler Wells and Kyle Bradish coming off Tommy John, rejoining you at some point in the second half of the season. That gives you even more depth in this starting rotation, but up top, it is not the same. And it feels like the question is, okay, who's going to start opening day, Zach Eflin or Grayson Rodriguez? And while it would be funny if they gave the ball to someone like Charlie Morton as kind of a lifetime achievement award, Grayson and Eflin are the guys who could actually pitch like aces and step up for the Orioles this season. Now, the differences between the two, like the case for Zach Eflin, he's done it before. He actually pitched opening day for the Rays last year, gave up 6 runs in 5 2/3 innings, actually ended up being his worst start of the entire season was his opening day start. So at least in Eflin's case, it only got better from there. Grayson has never started an opening day, but could be the guy who is the future ace of this team, more likely to be around for a while. I hope they extend Zach Eflin, but right now he's set to be a free agent after the 2025 season. Grayson's got many more years of control with the Orioles. So it's kind of a give or take. Do you give it to Eflin because he's the veteran and he's done it before? Or do you kind of show that public confidence in Grayson Rodriguez and give him the ball in game one? Now, it's a little less meaningful this year because the Orioles do open on the road in Toronto. So that opening day start means a little bit less when it's not at home. The home opener will be probably the number 5 starter, which is interesting. So it's going to be Morton, Sugano, or Kramer to get the ball in the home opener, which will definitely be interesting if it's Morton or Sugano. Like Sugano's first big league pitch is thrown in the Orioles home opener. Would definitely be interesting to watch. Maybe the O's will tinker with that rotation a little bit to set up someone who's done it before. I have a feeling it could be someone like they'll just set it up so Dean Kramer does start that game and is very familiar with those surroundings. But I don't think opening day starter is like a giant storyline. Again, it's one game, it kicks off the season, and they just kind of become part of the rotation. The reason I put this as a storyline is it's more about who will be the ace of this staff. Because if they don't go get a Dylan Cease or someone like that, and did not get somewhat of a replacement for Corbin Burns as he went and signed with the Diamondbacks this offseason, that's going to be the question for the Orioles all year is, can they do this without an ace-type starting pitcher, or do they need one to step up? Now, I mentioned in 2023, they won 101 games, won the division. Kyle Gibson started opening day for that team. Like, they certainly did not have an ace going into the year, but a young guy stepped up, and that young guy was Kyle Bradish, who was coming off a good finish to his 2022 season, his first in the big leagues. And then Bradish was amazing, and he finished 4th in AL Cy Young voting in 2023. He stepped up and pitched like an ace all season. And then later in that season, Grayson Rodriguez in the second half stepped up. He pitched really well. They still had Kyle Gibson throwing the ball at least solid for this team. And they had a group that got them to a division title, and you could really trust Kyle Bradish to have ace type stuff out there. And what the Orioles may need is, yes, they could get something like that from Zach Eflin, but I think Zach Eflin at this point at age 30, he is who he is. The Orioles did make some tweaks when they got him at the deadline from the Rays last year, but he probably doesn't have ace upside. His ceiling is like a really good number 2 starter. I don't think he has number 1 ceiling. He's still going to be a very, very important part of this Orioles rotation this year, but it's not an ace ceiling. On the other hand, I still think Grayson Rodriguez, this will be just entering his first quote unquote full big league season, or excuse me, his second quote unquote full big league season. Could be his first if you don't count last year because he missed the last 2 months with injuries. This is still a guy who was a top pitching prospect with ace-like upside. And who says Grayson Rodriguez can't do what Bradish did in 2023, fully break onto the scene and have a full great season? I think he absolutely could do it. And the way you look at it, if you break down the numbers, Corbin Burns in 2024 threw like 25 more innings than Kyle Bradish did in 2023. But if you look at the per inning stats and the rate stats, like Bradish was actually a little bit better overall, minus the less innings in 2023 than Burns was last year. So if Bradish could do that and pitch basically at a Burns level, why couldn't Grayson Rodriguez do that in 2025? That's going to be the key thing to watch. Can he do that and fill those shoes? And maybe if you get Kyle Bradish back in August or September and he looks healthy and good coming back from Tommy John, you add that kind of arm as well, then you feel a lot better at the top of your rotation. And in a perfect world, if you can get Bradish back and healthy by the time the postseason begins, if your 1, 2, 3 is Grayson Rodriguez, Zach Eflin, and Kyle Bradish, that can compete with a lot of rotations out there. It still maybe doesn't have the number 1 horse at the top, but that's competitive. And then whoever's pitching the best between Kramer, Sugano, Morton, Povich, Suarez, whoever it is, becomes your 4th starter in the postseason. You probably feel pretty good about that group going into October, but that does leave a lot of things to go right for you. That is Grayson stepping up and Bradish coming back healthy. Now for the Orioles, when they didn't really have that real ace, they were 25th in starting pitcher war. Probably not what you want to see back in 2023. Back in 2022. I guess you started with the last time they didn't have a true ace, right? Because if you say Bradish at least was one in 2023, the last time they really didn't have one step up was the 2022 season, where they turned it on the second half and won 83 games. They were 25th in starting pitching war that season. It was Jordan Lyles, Dean Kramer, Kyle Bradish, Spencer Watkins, Tyler Wells, Austin Voth was kind of the main six they used as starters. And the group the Orioles have right now for 2025, that is better than that Jordan Lyles, Dean Kramer group. Like, this group is better. They should be better than 25th in starting pitching war. But Fangraphs right now projects them to be 23rd in starting pitcher war in 2025. So not that much better than that 2022 group. It projects Zach Eflin to have the best ERA on this staff at 3.83. And that is where I think the Orioles are at least going to outperform a lot of the projections, because everything we've seen from Zach Eflin, he's better than the 3.83 ERA pitcher. They have Grayson Rodriguez being just below a 4 ERA. I doubt the Orioles, with this good of a team and this pitching development, will have their best starting pitcher be a guy with a 3.83 ERA. I'm confident both Eflin and Rodriguez will have better seasons than that and give them some more upside at the top of that rotation. And somebody's going to have to be better than that. I think it's going to be Grayson, and I think it's going to be Eflin, and maybe everybody else steps up a little bit more than you think, and this rotation is in a little better spot. Yes, they were really never going to be able to replace Corbin Burns if he left. Like, that's how good he is, basically an irreplaceable starter. But can you do it somewhat in the aggregate with young guys stepping up? And I think what a lot of people are forgetting, and again, this is no guarantee it's going to happen, but Grayson Rodriguez is basically in the exact spot Kyle Bradish was in heading into 2023, and Bradish stepped up and was a top 5 starting pitcher in the American League. If Grayson Rodriguez can do that, and again, he has all the tools to do it, just got to stay healthy and put it together, this rotation is probably in a lot better spot than many think at this point, with, of course, it missing Corbin Burns. But Grayson Rodriguez is not the only young guy with a lot of eyes on him this spring. One with even more is probably Jackson Holliday, and we'll talk about that coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by SelectQuote. In sports, having winning strategy is everything. It's how the best teams make it to the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the Olympics. And the same goes for life. Having a strategy like life insurance from SelectQuote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family's future secure. SelectQuote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. As one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, they've helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. What sets SelectQuote apart? It's their personal touch. Unlike other brokers with that one-size-fits-all policy, their licensed agents tailor coverage to fit your unique needs. And it's more affordable than you think. You can get up to $1 million in coverage for as little as $20 a month. So get the right life insurance for you for less at SelectQuote.com/lockedon. Go to SelectQuote.com/lockedon today to get started. That is SelectQuote.com/lockedon. SelectQuote. They shop, you save. So we move on to our second big storyline of Orioles Spring Training here in 2025, and that is Jackson Holliday ready to take over for the Orioles at second base? Because after the ups and downs of his first big league season last year, not making the opening day roster, then being called up 10 days later, then really struggling, going back to AAA, returning in July, hitting that grand slam, and then looking better overall, but still, even with the Orioles injuries in the infield and Jordan Westberg and Ramon Arias out, and even though he was looking much better than he did early in the season, Holliday was still not able to, by the end of the year, secure himself a spot in the lineup. And it was Arias coming back and playing well, and guys like Emmanuel Rivera filling in to get some big hits for the Orioles. And they kind of filled those roles more so than Holliday did, even though there was at least a slight opening for Jackson late in the year. He was on the roster. He just really didn't have that everyday playing time as the Orioles were figuring things out. Now, he has certainly worked on a lot. He went to that toe tap for his load at the end of the season, seemed to work a lot better. As we've seen, he's certainly put on some muscle in the offseason. Andy Koska had a good story about it in the Baltimore Banner, about how he was basically eating ground beef and rice, it seems, for every meal, including breakfast, some because he's 20 years old, 21 years old, not a great cook, some because it's the best way to help him put on muscle and add protein to his diet. And so it sounds like that's a lot of what Jackson was doing in the offseason. And from the pictures and video we've seen from Holliday showing up at camp, like, it has worked. He is much bigger and stronger. He is not he's not Tyler O'Neill level of jacked yet, but he is moving in that direction, and maybe will help him make better contact, hit the ball harder here in 2025. And it's not to say that a spot is guaranteed for Jackson Holliday, but the Orioles kind of have the starting second base job they're waiting for Holliday in 2025. Now, Ramon Urias is here with the great end of the season he had last year. I think he's certainly going to make the Orioles opening day roster as kind of their utility bench infielder. And if Urias does have to step in and play a chunk of second base and third base, he's done plenty of it over the last 5 years with the Orioles, and he can do it again if he needs to step in. But I don't think the Orioles are looking at this like it's a big second base competition. Whoever is better, Urias or Holliday in spring, is going to get that infield role along with Jordan Westberg and Gunnar Henderson. I think it's more like, hey, at 21, he's worked on a lot. He's gotten some of the rust off. He's gotten his feet wet in the big leagues. And again, he is still only 21 years old, but that's how much talent there is in Jackson Holliday. I think the Orioles are ready to hand over a good chunk of the reins, with Ramon Urias being a really nice soft landing spot to be there and fill in some of the cracks if Holliday does still struggle. And Holliday had a really good spring in 2024. I'm not sure him having a really good statistical spring this year again really matters much to this discussion. Obviously, he has options, and if it looks really bad again, they can certainly send him back to AAA Norfolk to begin the year and play Urias and roster somebody like Manuel Rivera or Levon Soto or whomever to fill a bench role for a bit until Holliday's ready, or maybe Kobe Mayo could get a shot there. But I don't really think that's what they want to do. I think they want to give most of the reins to Jackson Holliday. And we just really in spring, like, you want to watch him in games, see him look comfortable, see him look consistent, see him taking good swings and looking like he belongs in the big leagues. He doesn't have to hit 350 and hit 5 home runs in spring games. He doesn't need to do that. It's more about, is he hitting the ball hard? Is he swinging at good pitches? Is he looking comfortable in the box? Is he looking fluid defensively at second base? If he's passing, this is more about the eye test, I think, for the Orioles and for fans. Like, if he is passing the eye test, I think you can give him most of that second base job when the season begins. And even if it's that, hey, he's going to be in a platoon, he's going to be in the big side of a platoon where he plays against righties, and Ramon Urias, who's a right-handed hitter and hit much better against lefties last year, is going to be in there against lefties as Holliday continues to work on that. And maybe Holliday doesn't sit against every lefty, but he plays every once in a while against a lefty to keep getting those at-bats, because eventually he's going to be an everyday player. And then Urias gets the other ones to give the Orioles the platoon advantage, and an Urias bat, which certainly helped the O's down the stretch last year, and they want to keep him on his feet and keep him in the lineup from time to time to help this team. If Holliday's the big side of a platoon at second base, I think that's fine too. I think that's still handing over a lot of the reins at that position. But I think by the end of 2025, it should be Holliday's everyday job, whether it's a lefty or a righty on the mound, for Jackson Holliday to be in the lineup at second base for the Orioles. Now, I don't mean to say that means he needs to be hitting second or third or hitting leadoff, which I think he could down the road in a couple of years be the leadoff hitter for this team. I don't think he needs to be there, but I think by the end of the season, you want to see Jackson Holliday slotted in 6th or 7th in the lineup, playing second base every day and being a nice, productive bottom of the order hitter for this team at age 21. If he can do that, I think that is a hugely successful season for Jackson. I mean, again, this is a guy who just turned 21 in December. He's still super young, still has a lot of room to grow, but he's done some of that this offseason, I think. And I think it's going to be a lot better for Jackson. Like, a lot of the Fangraphs projection models have him right around a 110 WRC plus, so about 10% better than league average with the bat this season. And you'll certainly take that. If you look at like the Zips projections by Dan Zimborski, and 231, 335, 383, 15 homers, a 110 WRC plus, 13% walk rate in 135 games, just shy of 600 plate appearances. Like, that's not terrible. You'd like it to be a little bit better, but a projection with good defense and with a 3.1 WAR season. I think for a player who's going to hit probably in the bottom third of your lineup at age 21, I think you would absolutely take that kind of season from Jackson Holliday in 2025. You can get 3 WAR and an above average bat with really good defense and speed in 600 plate appearances. Age 21, sign me up, because there is so much depth in this lineup. And that is the other thing that I think people are passing over when evaluating what this Orioles team can do this season. Yes, The offense went cold. They slumped. It looked really rough in the second half for long stretches last year. But this is one of the best lineups in Major League Baseball. This is without a doubt a top 10 lineup in the major leagues. And you could absolutely argue this is a top 5 lineup in all of Major League Baseball. Fangraphs projected WAR for position players for the team. Number 1 is the Baltimore Orioles. No other group of projected opening day position players has a higher WAR projection as a team than the Baltimore Orioles. That's how good this position player group is heading into this year. And Jackson Holliday is going to be a part of that. So we're not expecting him to be the leadoff hitter and be an all-star this year. But if he can settle in comfortably, hit 15 home runs, walk some, hit the ball hard, hit for a little bit of average, be a above average bat, play good defense and run, like that is a great season from him at 21. And then at 22 and 23 continues to develop into a better and better hitter moving up the lineup. But the other great thing is this team, position player wise, is healthy and talented coming into the season. On opening day, the Orioles, they're probably going to face a righty. The Blue Jays have mostly, if not all, righties in their rotation. And so I would think Jackson Holliday will be the opening day starting second baseman for the O's unless things go horribly this spring in Sarasota. And I think he'd be hitting no higher than 7th in the order. Like I'd expect him to be maybe hitting 7th or 8th in that opening day lineup at second base. That's a lot of guys ahead of him to do the damage and not a lot of pressure on Jackson Holliday. And I think that's important. As long as he can look the part in spring training and be ready to go, you don't have to put a lot of pressure on him. He knows he has a veteran who's been there, done that, like Ramon Arias behind him to fill in if he struggles a bit. He doesn't need to think this entire thing is on his shoulders. And I think he knows that. I think he's going to come in more confident. And I just think this is a big thing to watch in spring. Does he look comfortable? Does he look like he belongs? And then I think the Orioles can give him that job and just take the pressure off, put him low in the lineup, and let it go from there this season. But Jackson Holliday is certainly a young guy who I think has some sort of roster role and probably a starting role, as I mentioned, earmarked for him. There are some other young guys who debuted last year for the O's who just don't really have a spot on this roster right now. That's the final storyline I want to talk about. How flexible is this roster here on February 18th? We'll discuss that to finish off the show coming up next. So the final of the 3 big Orioles spring training storylines I wanted to discuss on this episode is, can anyone steal a spot on this opening day roster? Because as I've been going through, opening day roster projections, the Orioles have put together this roster, guys showing up at spring training, and you look at who's going to make the team and who's going to go to AAA and who's going to end up on waivers. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of roster battles, right? Usually every year, every team has some roster battles. Who's going to get the 5 starter? Who's going to start in left field? Who's going to be the bench bat? Who's going to be the 8th inning versus the 7th inning versus the long man? The Orioles have a few of those, but not very many. And that's why in this big storylines, there's not a lot of roster battles. Like even with the opening day starter, it's most about who's going to be an ace, not who's going to be on the roster. Even with Jackson Holliday, it's like, he's going to be on the roster. Even if they don't fully hand over second base, he's going to be on the roster and be a part of this lineup in some way. There's not a lot of those will they make the roster or not where there are real battles going on there. With the moves the Orioles have made, the multiple contracts they've given out, major league players they brought in, the general health they have, especially on the position player side in spring training, and even like the guys who have had injuries so far that we've really talked about. It's been Trevor Rogers and Chase McDermott, both guys who were projected to start the year in the AAA Norfolk Tides rotation, like weren't going to be a part of the opening day roster conversation really. So that hasn't really taken a lot out of it. And even though Jorge Mateo is probably going to start the year on the IL, we've kind of known that was most likely going to be the case for a couple of months. We've been talking about this with the possibility of Mateo being on the IL anyway. So there haven't been a lot of big changes to like the projected roster since camp has started. It kind of feels like, and again, this is assuming health. There's still a lot of spring training to go for everybody to stay healthy, and not everybody is going to stay healthy. It's just the reality of baseball and the reality of sports. But the roster feels pretty set with not a lot of battles to happen. Like you have Adley Rutschman and Gary Sanchez as your catchers. In the infield, I feel like everyone can agree Ryan Mountcastle, Ryan O'Hearn, Gunnar Henderson, Jordan Westberg, Ramon Arias, and Jackson Holliday are going to be on this roster. In the outfield, I think everyone agrees Cedric Mullins, Colton Cowser, Tyler O'Neill are going to be on this roster. And honestly, with the way Mike Elias and Brandon Hyde have talked about it so far this spring, with what he's done in the past, with the fact that Santander is gone, I think there was a spot earmarked for Heston Kjerstad on this opening day roster as well. That right there is 12 hitters you're going to carry 13 hitters north to Toronto for opening day. So there's really one open spot. And honestly, I think the Orioles want to give it to an outfielder because of what they've done this offseason. And it's going to be Ramon Laureano. Like, yes, they brought in both Dylan Carlson and Ramon Laureano on one-year deals to play the outfield, but Laureano got more money, does not have minor league options, and Carlson is more of a project coming off some bad years and does have options. Ramon Laureano's coming off a good year in Atlanta. That move kind of told me that, hey, the Orioles know Mateo is going to be hurt, and they know that Ramon Laureano is going to be their final position player on the opening day roster. So you look at those 13 guys, Rutschman, Sanchez, Mountcastle, O'Hearn, Henderson, Westberg, Arias, Holliday, Mullins, Cowser, O'Neill, Kerstad, and Laureano. And it's like, unless there's an injury, I don't see anyone losing that spot. I don't see a lot of battles where someone could overtake them. The guys like Dylan Carlson, Daz Cameron, Emmanuel Rivera, Kobe Mayo, like being in the mix to try and get an opening day roster spot. Even if those guys light the world on fire in Sarasota, it would take a lot of struggles and some weird stuff going on from those top 13 guys for them to lose a spot. I just think that's how the Orioles want to cement this lineup and this position player group. And all those guys are good depth, especially a guy like Kobe Mayo to have in AAA. Still has some things to work on down there, I think. And I do think Kobe Mayo, especially in the second half, will help this Orioles team at some point, but there's just kind of not a spot for him to do that right now. And again, if there's an injury, this all changes. That is when you need to immediately call on that depth. But right now, and I don't know, like, let me know here in the Locked On Orioles YouTube comments if you disagree, if you think there's more roster battles among the 13 position player spots. I just kind of feel like it's fairly set, unless anything goes disastrously wrong for one of these guys besides an injury. It feels kind of set. There's not really those battles. So then let's jump it over to the pitching side. Like, the rotation feels pretty set. And if it's going to change, it would be because they added an ace and another spot was lost. But right now it's Grayson, Eflin, Morton, Kramer, Sugano as your 5. I mean, maybe if they had brought in only one of Charlie Morton or Tomoyuki Sugano on those one-year deals, there'd be some sort of battle here. It'd be like, hey, Cade Povich versus Albert Suarez. Who's going to get that number 5 spot in the rotation? Is the other one going to be in the bullpen? There'd be some questions there. But now it's like, there's your 5. And then they just kind of secured that depth with solid veterans, which was nice. I think it raised the floor of this roster to bring in 2 vets and just know, hey, these are our number 4 and number 5 starters. We're going to feel good at these guys. The younger guys are going to be depth. And maybe if in spring training, Sugano, who was great in Japan, just won MVP, but again, has never thrown a pitch in Major League Baseball. Maybe if he comes over and just looks completely overwhelmed against big league hitters in spring training and the O's have to do something here where they move him to the bullpen and there's a different guy in the number 5 spot, like, that's possible, I guess. But I trust Sugano and the amount he's pitched and the awards he's won in Japan, the second best league in the world, to be able to figure it out enough to be a solid number 5 starter in the majors and have the Orioles go from there, at least on opening day. I can't imagine something goes so bad for a guy with his pedigree that the Orioles are scrambling to find somebody else to be their number 5 starter. So that feels pretty set. And then you look in the bullpen, and we talked about the updates on Felix Bautista. The Orioles are confident. He feels good, like he's going to be ready for opening day, but it hasn't been guaranteed that he'll be fully ready to go. And as I mentioned last week on the show, he still could certainly start the year with a quick injured list trip just to get him fully ready and then bring him onto the roster. Now, if Felix is healthy, it feels like the bullpen is set. Like, you have Felix Bautista, and then you have Yennier Cano. He's going to be a part of it. Sir Anthony Dominguez and Gregory Soto coming back. They're going to be a part of it. The Orioles like CNL Perez. I mean, maybe he could be a DFA option, but they like the stuff enough to keep him. They went out and signed Andrew Kittredge to a 1-year deal. Like, he's going to have a spot in that bullpen as well. That's 6 guys right there. And then, yes, Keegan Aiken has minor league options, but he was so good for the O's last year in that swing role. I feel like they're going to earmark a position for Keegan Aiken. And then there's one spot for your long man, and that feels like, hey, Albert Suarez is out of options. He doesn't have a rotation spot. He's going to be your long man, and you can kind of send Povich to AAA and have him ready when you need another starter, which is going to be at some point in the season. I mean, the only battle would be if the Orioles do feel that Felix Bautista does have to start the year on the injured list. Then you have an open bullpen spot where guys like Brian Baker and Matt Bowman and Colin Selby and maybe even Cade Povich are battling for it. But that's only if he's going to be on the injured list. And the Orioles will be evaluating those guys all spring just in case Felix or another arm hits the IL. And maybe one of those guys, Bowman, Selby, or Baker, could pitch so well combined with like some Keegan Aiken struggles in spring, that they could take Aiken's spot and Aiken could begin the year in Norfolk. That's also possible, but it doesn't seem super likely. And again, we have more than a month until opening day, so a lot of things could change. But for this early in spring training, I mean, we are the day of the first full squad workout. This feels pretty set for an opening day roster. Again, things could absolutely change. Let me know in the comments if you think, again, the pitchers aren't this set and there's more guys in the race, and there's a little wiggle room here, especially if Felix is going to start the year on the IL. Then there's a little battle with the guys like Bowman and Selby and Baker, but otherwise, it's not a lot of battles to watch. It's more about, do these young guys look ready to take another step? And does this next group of guys ready to be good AAA depth and look like they could step up at some point in the season if the Orioles needed them? And it's more about the other storylines. It's more about, hey, Jackson's going to be on the roster. Is he ready to start every day? Hey, Eflin and Grayson are going to be big parts. Are either of them ready to step up and be the ace that they don't have right now? Sugano's going to be on this roster. Is he going to be a major league starter? Morton's going to be on this roster. Is he going to be a number 5 starter, or does he still have upside to really help this team? Those are the questions, which are good things to watch in spring training. Don't get me wrong, but it's not the usual, they're battling out for one final roster spot. That's not as much here. It feels like kind of a more set roster, but we know injuries happen, and I know a week from now that could completely change. And if it does, of course, we'll have it all covered here on the show. The show does continue tomorrow. If we get any news updates from the first full squad workouts, certainly we'll address them tomorrow. If not, we've got, I believe, 4 players remaining to talk about their 2024 seasons and their outlooks for 2025. So we'll continue on that path with some of the biggest name position players on this team coming up on tomorrow's show. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.